Welcome everyone to the Association of College and Research Libraries Virtual Worlds Interest Group, which is a part of the American Library Association and has been meeting here in Second Life monthly for 15 years. There's a link to the ACRL VWIG Virtual Worlds Interest Group. We always start each month right here at the VWEC Fireside Deck because we support teaching and learning in the metaverse. And then we often teleport to high-quality simulations and events in Second Life and also across the metaverse in other worlds on the third Wednesday. Note in the chat it says 9 a.m., but we recently changed that. We meet the third Wednesday of the month at 10 a.m. Pacific time, Second Life time. The Community Virtual Library has sponsored these events since 2009 with librarians who now work right here at the VWEC Thinkerer Info Center, a tribute to the Thinkerer, Selby Evans, champion of virtual worlds. We're creating directories and databases to provide real resources. Excuse the phone call. Real resources right here in the virtual world. Today we have an intriguing presentation with Delia Lake, and the title is Living in an Immersive World. I know this will spark some interesting conversation and thoughts, so I'll turn the mic over now to Delia Lake.
Thank you very much, Val. And I'm glad to see everybody here. And I second what Val says. I hope this will be end up being a good conversation, at least at the end here. As I'm sure you will all agree, reading is not only a pleasure, but a way of learning vast and wonderful things. Reading introduces us to a world of facts and a world of imagination. But extending beyond imagination, the addition of experiences, for me anyway, enriches knowledge beyond what reading alone can do. For me, adding experience to reading enhances my engagement with the reading. I understand what I read at a deeper level. And today I am sharing some highlights from my life as an adventurer avatar, immersing myself for extended periods into worlds about which I had previously only read. I've learned a lot in doing this. These are insights I did not get from my reading. Each experience has had a lasting and profound effect on me, and I'd like to share some of them with you today. I am Delia Lake's alt. My name is Delia Lake Pinion, and I came into this world of Second Life in July of 2007. I was brought here by my primary so that she could have access to more groups than an avatar was allowed by Linden Lab at that time. So basically, I started life here as a functionary of convenience. Luckily for me, it quickly became apparent that I could do so much more. And the trigger for this realization was one evening when my primary was exploring, and she went to a NASA region. She was a newbie at the time, or almost, and was walking around a ring platform way above the land, looking at stars and planets. And since she was pretty much a newbie, she was unable to control her walking and her movement. And that was a gut reaction of going to fall down and kill herself. So that had reverberations for me, and I found a real role here as an explorer and a researcher. So today I'm going to share with you some of my experiences. I have been at many places, many places, but I've chosen four scenarios in which I immersed myself. Two are older experiences, two are more recent, and they are Camp Darfur, Prairie Past, Arabian Nights, and the Dickens Project. And some of you have probably been through some of these sites in the past. Oh, and by the way, there I am sitting at my desk. I finally have a small home. I have a one-room caretaker cottage in the Tuscan Hills that is just one room with nothing and part of a rural estate. Yeah, I'll talk about the parrot, actually a macaque, a macaw. But first we're going to go to Camp Darfur. Now, Camp Darfur was on Better World Island, and I became familiar with it almost immediately when I came into Second Life. So here's a little background for you on this site. You know, it was originally Darfur is in East Africa, in Sudan. It's originally very green and lush, but drought and overpopulation just provided scourge to the land. And land that used to support both Arab herders and black farmers in the region no longer provided the sufficient resources for both of them. And so the setup here was one of a refugee camp. And there are a number of them in the Darfur area that have been there now for many years. But driven by fear and famine, thousands and thousands of people sought refuge. They were running to escape genocide, and because they actually couldn't feed themselves. So they were dependent on food drops from charities, from the UN. And we were fortunate enough to have funding from the Omijar Foundation and from the International Rescue Committee. And that made us able to create this replica of a camp. Has anybody, I don't know if people were here at that time in 2007, 2008, but if you were, did you ever visit here? I put myself here for a month. And this was the first time that I had really done this kind of an experiment. So I wanted to make sure I logged in every day and this became my home. I lived here. So what did I do during the day? Food was at a premium. I spent a lot of my day gathering food resources, preparing food, not only for myself, but for some of the people around me. One would think it might have been lonely, but there are so many pictures there, or were, that I felt like these women, particularly women, became my friends. But these routine days were interspersed with times of extreme terror, because as in the actual camps in Darfur, They were raided by the Janjaweed militia. They called themselves militia. We called them much worse because they were focused on rape and pillage and terrifying as they rode in on huge camels. So that's me at the top toward the right, standing up to one of the Janjaweed as one of the older people hoping to prevent the rape of young girls. And then at the bottom, there is my tent. I lived there for a month, nestled in with all of the other refugees who were there. So what did I learn by this experience? Some of the insights that I got. Here are what I noticed. I noticed that these camps are places of desolation. They're isolated people. Even though it's crowded, people are protective of the very, very little that they still have. So what else I learned, and this was the first and huge thing, is that my privilege as a safe and secure Western white woman was just gobsmacking. I mean, it was there with me every single minute that I, unlike the refugees in the actual Darfur, could leave. I could stop this experiment. I did not have to put myself through this if I didn't want to. So as I did this day by day, logging in, I came to be caught in the surface tedium. But underneath that was an anxiety and a real sadness of loss, of uncertainty, of what life would bring from then on. Would I even survive? Would my children or grandchildren survive? And one surprising, unplanned, and interesting thing that happened was I was there in an evening and I was tending a fire, and two men came by. It just happened that they were actual Sudanese of the privileged class living in Khartoum, the capital. And they started arguing with me. They were denying that there was such a thing as camps in Darfur. Of course, they lived far to the north of where these, and east of where these camps are. But that was another insight that everywhere in the world, the privileged ruling classes have that same denial and ignorance and of situations in their lands, in their countries, in their regions, and the same kind of a social chasm that we find in so many countries of the world. So I'm going to pause and see if there are comments each time when I come to the end of a section. So are there comments on this or questions? Text or voice, either one is fine. Not seeing any, I'll move on to our next site. So, and I'm trying to give some contrast here of the different sites that I've chosen as well. Okay. Katri has a comment here, so I'm going to pause Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. It is. It is the disaster relief, and that's what the International Rescue Committee brought to that site. Yeah, and Val, yes, when you go once, you don't have that mental engagement. You don't have that visceral engagement. But when you sign into a place day after day after day, evening after evening after evening, it begins to feel like you live there. It's really different than just going on a one-time or a two-time visit to a site. Yeah. So the next site, and all of these are no longer available, unfortunately. Darfur and Prairie Pass are long gone, and the other two are temporary and not available right now either. So Prairie Pass was part of an experiment, again, that the Amadar Foundation funded in conjunction with the Better World Island. And it was part of looking at prairie restoration, looking at the past, the present, and the more recent past of the Dust Bowl, and then what the future could bring with agricultural practices that were more in line with the kinds of lands that is. So the prairie land is part of a global savanna type of biome that comprises basically the breadbaskets of the world. And the western prairies of the United States is an important growing and grazing area that is one variation of that. So by nature, these temperate grasslands are broad plains with scarce trees and distinct wet and dry seasons. Some of the other significant areas are plains areas such as those that are found on the East European and Central Asian steppes, the Murray-Darling Basin of Australia, the plains of South Central Argentina and Chile, northern South Africa, and similar regions on every continent besides Antarctica. So what was it like there? It was designed, this particular one was designed as a north temperate region that runs from the U.S. Western plains up through the southern parts of Canada, particularly Alberta. And it has been in the actual solid world significantly abused and degraded. The setup here for this section, one of 4 sections, was that the inhabitants were a small band of indigenous peoples who had camped during the warm season. So in that area, that is late spring through summer through early fall. And on a small corner of the vast prairie. What you don't see anywhere here is that off to the side is a river, so there is spot for fishing as well. So what was life like there? And again, I lived here for a month. My life while I was there was a life of doing. hunting, fishing, gathering, tending, preparing, preserving, making, mending. I learned the flint knack, protecting, and I guess one of the most surprising but delightful is that people would celebrate accomplishments because they meant so much. It was a hard life. I wove baskets, I tended children, I had to pound the grains that I gathered into flour, tend horses, I tanned hides and dried fish, but I also danced and sang and told stories with family and friends. So hard, difficult, was balanced by a joyous sharing among family and friends. I also had an opportunity to host tours of the region. For these tours, I used as an introduction a short story that was written by my father years ago. He wrote about being a 5-year-old who got stuck in an outdoor bread box. Now, he lived in the farmlands of upstate New York. I didn't tell the people who visited that, though. And remarkably, people from all over the world identified with this story and with the virtual prairie community. I would never have thought that visitors from southern Norway, from Ukraine, from Chile, and from northern Japan were each positive that the story was written about the indigenous peoples who had historically lived on their lands. So that sparked really rich conversation that stuck with me and changed my perspective on peoples of the world forever. So what were my insights from this? What I noticed was that everyone worked at something. And as I said earlier, accomplishments were so hard fought that they were celebrated. What I learned was open prairie is a dangerous place to live, particularly if you're alone and isolated, so that people continue to live tribal lives, gathering with other people, made a whole lot more sense to me than it had before I started this. Planning for food and shelter was above everything else that one had to do. And because the weather and the uncertainty of other people who might want the resources, it's a time of planning but not knowing. The children were not coddled, but they were raised around the work. And so as soon as a child was old enough to do a little bit, they were assigned tasks. At the end of the growing and gathering season, people moved on. And that allowed the resources in an area to recover. It wasn't the same as doing the crop rotation, for instance, but it was really giving the land the time to recover and go back to its natural state, and the animal and to be able to recover as well. So before we move on to the next section, any comments or questions about Prairie Past? It was well before storyteller bots, but there were cutouts of people. And occasionally, other people did come and stay. With these first two, my primary was was one of the curators of Better World Island. So these were associated with Better World, and I was kind of plopped down there to explore. As I showed in the very first slide, my first assignment as a non-functionary of convenience avatar was to be the at least titular manager of the underwater systems at the Center for Water Studies at Better World Island. So I knew that these existed, these first two, and was able to situate myself. That's not the same for the next two, because the next two I think most of you will recognize, and some of you will know very well. But the interaction with people, Val, and everybody was really important in all of these, and that is not something that I had expected. I hadn't planned on it. I was just thinking about myself. But the interaction with other people added a richness that wouldn't have been there otherwise. The third area here is one that I think you will recognize, because the library, the community virtual library, was very much engaged in the Arabian Nights project of 2023. And after visiting there, I think on a invitation, probably from Val, I decided I would hang out there for a bit and live there. So what was this place? For me, the background was, I knew the stories of 1001 Nights, or at least a number of them, of the Middle Eastern folk tales. I knew the period of Islamic Golden Age, the 8th century to 13th century, because I'd read about those in history. I also knew that the Persian Gulf was a real crossroads of commerce. So that had me already having some background here, without looking into the project any further. So what was the setup here? It was basically an encampment with a market square. And it was populated by a lot of vendors and some travelers. Did anybody here go there? Do you remember this site? Yeah, it was beautiful. And P. Ilios, who did most of the build, did a magnificent job. So, what was life there like for you? Yeah, it is. It's you really have to seek these out and cherish them when you come across them. So I, as I said, decided I would hang out here for the month, live here. What was my daily life like? I was a widow. And as a widow without any real family, I became an indentured servant. Luckily, I had a kind mistress, and she was a business owner who had a market stall. She sold rugs and textiles and sometimes produced cloth herself. So my job was to spin yarn and weave cloth. On my time off, I walked around. I particularly liked visiting the animals. There was rather than a stall, there was a little bit larger pen that had a variety of animals. And as I was an indentured servant and really in a class system couldn't talk with the other merchants, I ended up talking to the donkey a lot. Occasionally, when I'd been able to save a few very small coins, I could buy myself a cup of tea and sit there and pretend that I was back in my old life of a married woman. So what did I learn here? Some of my insights started with, what did I notice? I noticed that here in this time, all of the bots here were information bots that led me to think about knowledge and how prized knowledge was and flourishing at that time. And even though they mixed together, people were divided into very distinct classes, and I did not feel that I had the freedom to, as an indentured servant, to talk to most people. Although some women, like my mistress, did have privileges, so it wasn't a time of the severe oppression of women that you find in a lot of the Islamic world today. But given all this, I got to experience that the life of an indentured servant was very regulated, very restricted, and there were so many things that I could see but not do. But surprisingly, I was allowed to keep some of my possessions, so that I still had the jewelry that was given to me by my late husband. I also, doing this spinning and weaving day after day after day, I really got the tedium and the repetitiveness of the creative work. So what looks as a very creative end result has a lot of repetitive hard work behind it. And not only as an indentured servant, but really across the board, the quality of her life at that time was much dependent on either the kindness or cruelty of others. And lastly here, this is my second donkey experience, and I found I really liked donkeys. So I will pause here for a minute and see if there are any questions and comments. How did I come up with my character? That's a good question, Val, and it just kind of came to me. I didn't plan it that way. I was attracted to the spinning wheel in this particular booth that nobody was using. And so I sat down there and I thought, I think I live here. And how did I get here? And so it just kind of flowed out of doing that. And this is what happens often with the experiential settings. And in fact, I find it's a pretty good rule of thumb that you don't plan everything ahead, but you just kind of fall into it. A little bit was a fill-in, because in this build, my mistress was one of the information bots. And so she had a lot of information about what her role was and what the actual booth was. No, I couldn't arrange anything. I was stuck with what there was. All I could do was walk around. And most of the time I felt safe there. But I did sometimes, some days when I came in and I looked at the pictures of the traders, like the one in this picture where you see the long line of mostly men coming down the hill and into the marketplace. That did give me pause, that maybe I wasn't as safe as I felt. Any other comments or questions here?
I'm just wondering how the experience stayed with you when you logged off, and then when you went back in the day. Did part of your consciousness feel like it was still there in the evenings?
Yes, it did. It did. When I came back in, it was like I had never left. Like I had just been off doing something else that was out of sight. Yeah, it was a very small space, as you say, but it was a full space. And I think that having the bots with the information really contributed to that, because then it showed that each of the merchants was very different.
Warn that this day shall not pass until thou art put to death, if thou do not bring to him the slave.
It made it a more complete experience. Do we have more questions or comments, or should I move on here? Not seeing any, I will go to the fourth. Because the fourth is the most recent. And that is the recently packed up for next year, I certainly hope, the Dickens Project for 2025. And I would guess that a number of people here did see that one, or did have some experience there, either walking around, taking a ride on in the carriage with Old Bay, or coming to one of the talks. Yeah, good. The Dickens Project is a real favorite here. So here again, we have a setup and a comparative real life background. Set in Victorian London and based to a large degree on A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. So that was published in 1843, and that sets the whole region, the whole experience into early Victorian London. And if you were there, you noticed there were homes, museums, a church, harbor, different kinds of shops, and oh, so much more. There was also a pretty pronounced class system. So throughout this, in various places, you will notice that there is class distinctions. Again, in this experience, I was a widow, this time a childless widow, but of moderate means. So I was not without resources, but not wealthy by any means. So what was daily life like for me? So here is a montage of daily life that some of you probably did notice as you were walking around. So what did I spend my time with? I found that I had to go shopping for provisions almost every day because there was minimal storage available. When I could take a break, take a rest, after preparing gathering and preparing some food, I could read. Or I could do various crafts and arts. So I went back to knitting. And it didn't hit me at the time when I was in Arabian Nights, but it really hit me in the Dickens project as I had kind of appropriated one of the little houses on the outskirts here. And upstairs there was a bedroom with a spinning wheel. And as I sat at this spinning wheel and thought about my life, it got me wondering about spinsters. And was the designation spinster, did it come from particularly women who were alone, who were occupying their time trying to be useful? And how did that feel as a designation for me? And so I sat with that for quite a while. Alone was not my style ever in any life. So I found that I volunteered to be a docent at the art museum, but I spent a lot of time going back in the afternoons to the aviary. And oops, sorry about this. Can't seem to get rid of that. All right. Current tech life has come in. But the aviary had what was then exotic plants and animals. And this brings me back to Ravelli's comment about the parrot, that it actually isn't a parrot, it actually is a scarlet macaw. And the aviary housed animals from all over the world that were brought back And I noticed that I really liked sitting there. I liked looking at all of the animals and the realization that these animals that were so well known to me were novel and unknown to the people of that time. And a little a bit backwards again here in the reading, I spent time reading Jane Eyre and reading Lewis Carroll. And those today are historic fiction, but at that time they were new. So it put a different kind of a light on the books I was reading. But before I get further into the insights here, I want to mention two other things, and that is the skating was really an important outlet. And I know that my grandmother, who was raised in the Victorian era by parents who were also born into the Victorian era, really prized skating. And so I went there frequently. But the other reason I mention my grandmother is that I decided that as part of the immersion, I needed to participate in the activities that people of that time that I knew about would have done. And so Sundays, I spent almost all day in church. It's not something that I do in my current day life. But I did there. And when I came home, I was pretty much restricted to reading the Bible, which again was a novel, provided some novel insights for me. So what were those? What were some of those? I noticed that there was quite a variety of meeting halls, and I went to many of them and joined in many of the discussions. I also noticed, and this was something that I had never thought about before, was how dark it was inside the buildings. But whoa, was it dark. I wondered, as I was learning, whether this feeling of aloneness, because I didn't have a family, whether that fostered some push toward eccentricity. And maybe it was partly because there were all of these exotic animals around. But maybe it was also an attempt to get some recognition of some kind. And so I thought about, I'm going to forget the name of the writer in Paris before the Victorian era, who was the first one that was written about to walk around Paris with a what he called a pet lobster. But it was followed by many, many years later, Oscar Wilde doing the same thing. It's certainly eccentric behavior. But I found that I wanted some exotic pets. So the scarlet macaw and Charlize, my French bulldog, were novel at that time. French bulldog was only recognized as a breed, I think, in the 1880s. So although they were around a little bit earlier than that, this was a new kind of a dog. Um, I also noticed how cold it was in the winters and how women's clothes were not adequate. I got a better insight into my grandmother's real discipline, because I know that she also did not want to spend all of Sunday in church, but she did. And I think that forced discipline carried her throughout her life, and really was an important feature of her life. But to carry one other thread through here is that I found I really, really like donkeys, and I had to have one in Second Life. And I don't have one in the solid life, although I have ridden a donkey. But I now have a Second Life donkey. Riding a donkey through London, Victorian London. Yep. This is not the end of my story, though. My story continues, and my current immersive project is Director of Food Development on the Science Circle Moon Base. So if people are interested in going to visit that, this is an ongoing project of the Science Circle. And I work in the greenhouse, basically. But it is very innovative work in figuring out the kinds of food that can be grown for people who are semi-permanent residents of a moon base colony. So ask me about that later if you're interested. But right now, with the time we have remaining, let's hear from you. Not only questions and comments, but what ideas does this spark for you? What kinds of things that my presentation might have brought up that you hadn't thought about before? Have you had any of these experiences? Will you try this in the future? Yeah. So I'm going to stop for a minute and turn it over to you all. Yeah, for me, Val, and I said I was going to stop, but I'm not here. The historic accuracy was and is important. Because otherwise it wouldn't provide insights. It would be fictional information.
I wanted to ask about the Dickens.
So what are you all thinking about now?
I have a question about the Dickens project. I wasn't sure, were there other people in that immersive experience with you? And because I got the sense... Yeah.
This is an interesting area of discussion, Helena, that is it the actual accuracy, or is it that an environment has to be plausible in some way and have some coherence in some way? Yeah. No, Sophia, for the most part, there weren't other people. And one of the suggestions that I made for next year is that the Dickens Project might want to engage and train some docents so that there would be people there at different times. It's a remarkable, remarkable site. with so much richness. And to have people who were live there for a good part of a day, one or two people, however many would want to be there, I think would have more people visit when there are not specific events going on.
I did want to point out this research article. Years ago, I stumbled upon these terms, immersionist and augmentationist. And it's something just you might want to look at because it's quite interesting.
That's another interesting question and observation here. And if you are, in my experience anyway, if you are looking for just augmentation without immersion, you're only going to get a little bit. But if you have immersion first, then augmentation becomes almost automatic. So that there are ways that the experiences and the insights you gain from immersion do not leave you. And another piece that I did not put in any of the scenarios here because I have no pictures whatsoever. And I don't know if anybody else will remember the La Amistad, which was a very small site, and I think it was originally a small college or university in London, no longer available, no longer here. And I don't see anybody here who I know for sure was there, and I think it was either 2010 or 11, but it was in that range when there were a lot of universities around. But anyway, the Amistad was a Spanish slave trade ship, and it was inside, had in the hold plank berths that were very tight and where enslaved persons were held in chains. And there was also a debarkment site with a platform for selling these people. I inhabited this site for a week. I couldn't stand it any longer than that. But it has stuck with me forever and ever. And some of the experiences here of standing half naked on the auction block was one of the most humiliating and frightening experiences of my life. Much more frightening than standing up to the Janjaweed in Darfur, because those men wanted to rape and pillage then leave. But the slave traders wanted to own people for life. And as a testament to and reminder of that experience, ever since then, I have worn on my left ankle the shackle that was put on me to chain me. I still have it on today. I've never taken it off. So, yeah, there are lasting effects of the experiences and insights.
Very powerful presentation, Delia. Some great examples of how
I think
intense
that
a virtual world can be.
There will be more ways that the metaverse will evolve, and that digital citizenship will become rather prevalent. And I think this is related to some of the developments in artificial intelligence, and that when that becomes a true hybrid of natural systems and artificial systems, where and some of my RL work is related to this. I think of it like M.C. Escher's drawing of hands, and the hand drawing the hand, drawing the hand, drawing the hand forever, where you have the humans who are programming the computers, who are then programming some of the genetic modifications that will alleviate disease, that the humans then program more algorithms. And as this goes on and true hybrids emerge, I think that that's going to have repercussions into the metaverse as well.
Great presentation. Thanks, everyone.